He had more money than most of his neighbors had ever seen. He built islands and opera houses. He signed checks with a flick of a wrist. And the company that once put food on America's table, the grocery empire that ran 16,000 stores at its peak, ended in a bankruptcy filing in 2015. How does a dynasty fall from that height? In one sentence, grandiosity bought with private wealth, mixed with slow-moving industry shifts, became a recipe for liquidation. Stay with me. The Why is a forensic story of dollars, decisions, and deep human ambition. Imagine a Saturday in 1950. A&P stores ring a city like a belt. 16,000 shop fronts, brass registers, clerks who know customers by name. The signs are everywhere. An empire of grocers that taught America how to buy food. The Hartford family sits at the top of that kingdom. They are not merchants in the old sense. They are heirs, owners, guardians. The stores feed millions, but the family keeps the keys. Enter Huntington Hartford. He inherited an income that, at the time, was roughly $1.5 million a year. A lifetime of comfort, by any measure. A bookkeeping line that read like permission. What he chose to do with that permission is the hinge of this story. He bought islands. He built resorts. He curated art. Paradise Island in the Bahamas was the crown jewel. Turquoise water, manicured palms, hotels rising like stage sets. He poured money into projects meant to be legacies, but they rarely returned the cash he sank into them. This is not just a tale of excess. It's a forensic accounting of priorities. When a family extracts wealth from a company faster than the company can reinvest, the balance sheet changes in quiet ways. Cash that could modernize stores, upgrade distribution, invest in price-competitive sourcing, cash that secures long-term survival, becomes seed money for personal dreams. The result is a slow drift from dominance to vulnerability. The sharp moment is the paradox. The family's fortune both founded the empire and, in some ways, undermined its ability to adapt. Listen to the numbers as a ledger of mood. At its height in the 1950s, A&P was the largest retailer on the planet. Then the world changed. New supermarket formats emerged, shopping habits shifted, new competitors practiced ruthless economies of scale and thinner margins, and logistics became a science. A family-led empire used to steady rents and reliable returns needed to reinvent itself. That reinvention requires capital, but it also requires focus and governance. Huntington's focus was sometimes elsewhere. Imagine a boardroom where the charts show creeping market share losses, where distribution centers need modernization, where private label products must be developed to counter lower prices from rivals. Now imagine those conversations while checks are being cut for a hotel ballroom or an art purchase. That tension, corporate upkeep versus personal indulgence, repeats through the decades. This is not a single bad quarter. It is a multi-decade set of choices that compound. Paradise Island is a useful symbol because it is so vivid. The resort took years to build. It required capital injections, subsidized operations during slow seasons, and ongoing maintenance. For every pressing need back in New York, a cracked tile in a failing distribution hub, an aging truck fleet, there was another ribbon cutting in Nassau. The island produced glamour, but not the cash velocity grocery logistics demand. The return on those investments was measured in prestige, not in pallets shipped and margins preserved. You can hear the industry changing in small sounds. A longer drive to a supermarket with wider aisles, a refrigerated truck arriving on schedule instead of a late delivery, a barcode scanning system that saves time and takes inventory accuracy from guesswork to real-time data. Those are investments. They cost money up front. They pay off slowly but decisively. Put another way, grocers win on supply chains and discipline more than on grand marketing alone. When leadership prefers spectacle to systems, a stealth decline begins. Tension. Who runs a company? The family or the business? That question sits at the core. A&P's structure kept control close. But close control can also mean a single set of tastes and choices shapes capital allocation. Huntington Hartford was not a quiet accountant. He was a patron, a man of taste and large plans. Forensic analysis of cash flows shows that recurring withdrawals for personal projects reduced retained earnings available for modernization. Over the long haul, a company that does not reinvest cannot maintain its competitive edge. This is not to say Huntington was singularly responsible for every problem. Market forces are not polite. Supermarket wars erupted as competitors consolidated, optimized, and prioritized low-cost distribution. New entrants like national chains brought different economies, and discount retailers circled with thinner margins. A&P, once the definition of scale, became a player in a field where scale meant something different: centralized buying power, efficient real estate placement, and a ruthless turn on private labels. When rivals squeezed prices, margins thinned, and legacy costs, pensions, older real estate contracts, became anchors. From an economic perspective, the collapse reads like a ledger closing. Assets once valued at billions saw depreciation in goodwill, a deterioration of store-level profitability, and an erosion of brand relevance. Imagine $2.7 billion, the figure that follows this story like a headline. It is not one single check, but the cumulative collapse of equity value, real estate write-downs, liabilities, and missed returns over decades. Numbers like that are both headline and symptom. Asset values fall when future cash flows are no longer expected to support them. Those expectations shift when capital allocation favors grandeur over operations. How did customers experience it? On the ground, in fading linoleum and fewer stocked shelves. A chain that once had a clerk greet you by name becomes another box on the block. Stores close in waves. Managers leave. Employees lose trust. The brand, once a daily companion, becomes associated with emptiness. That erosion in consumer trust feeds back into lost sales, which tightens margins further, prompting more closures. Economically, it's a vicious cycle. Declining sales lead to deferred maintenance, which leads to worse customer experiences, which lead to further decline. There are human costs, too. Huntington's projects were not just vanity. He genuinely sought to build beauty. Museums, theater spaces, cultural centers, things intended to be public goods. But when personal philanthropy is funded by a corporate family fortune that could have shored up the company, the lines blur. Should a family use a corporate dividend to build a private island? The ledger will record the transfer of wealth. The employees who stock the shelves will feel the consequences in a slower conveyor belt of investment. Pause. If you like this kind of historical economic deep dive, take a moment to subscribe. There are more stories where this came from. No hard sell, just more quiet, careful examinations of how fortunes and institutions move. The next arc is the slow, legal, and administrative decline. Ownership changes hands. There are mergers and spin-offs, attempts to modernize with mixed success, and periodic cash infusions that act like bandages. Sometimes leadership tries to cut costs drastically, but cutting too deep without strategic investment is like pruning a tree into a stake. It survives less gracefully. Other times, there are attempts to revive the brand with repositioning campaigns, new store formats, and partnerships. Yet each attempt competes with the specter of legacy liabilities, pension obligations, long-term leases, and aging infrastructure. By the early 2000s, the company looked different. The thick network of small neighborhood stores had been hollowed out into fewer, larger operations. But rivals had perfected efficiencies that A&P had once pioneered. It is worth pausing on a basic economic truth. Innovation is not permanent. The first mover advantage can become a fossil if the mover rests on past glory. A&P's story is a textbook example. The very skills that built the empire, distribution knowledge, branding, market penetration, needed cyclical reinvestment to remain relevant in a world that learns fast and scales faster. Then came the last chapter. The final bankruptcy filing in 2015 was, in one sense, an administrative denouement. In another sense, it was a cultural one, an empire that fed a nation failed to feed itself. The legal paperwork reads clinical, petitions, schedules, creditor lists, but the images that linger are mundane and poignant. Empty aisles, clearance stickers, a store manager closing the door for the last time. The cascade of closings sent shocks through communities that had relied on local A&P stores for decades. Why did it end here, rather than at some earlier inflection point? Because the decline was cumulative, and the system can hide stress for years. There's a delay between capital outflow and collapse. You can run a company on reputation and residual cash for a long time, but once competitors optimize and consumers shift habits, the margin for error becomes razor thin. The final bankruptcy is the point when no plausible reorganization can deliver a future that meets outstanding claims and obligations. Think of it as a reverse Horatio Alger narrative. Instead of pulling oneself up, the story tracks a different trajectory. Inherited abundance feeds personal designs. Personal designs siphon capital away from adaptive reinvestment. Adaptive reinvestment is what an industrial age, customer-facing empire needs to survive changing market forces. The image that sticks is ironic and stark. An heir spends lavishly to create paradises, while the hometown stores begin to lose their warmth. There is a forensic clarity when you lay the ledgers side by side. On one sheet, capital expenditures to modernize warehouses decline. On another, personal withdrawals for projects spike. On a third, industry operating expenses fall for competitors as they invest in cold chains, distribution centers, and barcodes. The interplay explains a lot. It's not the glamour that did the damage in isolation. It's the cumulative misallocation of resources over time that transformed a once indomitable business into a liquidation case. A final human moment. Imagine an elderly checker who remembers when the manager knew every supplier by name, when deliveries were a handshake and a ledger. He stands now in a shuttered aisle, a cart of fixtures waiting to be auctioned off. Buyers come and go. The island remains, maybe sold, maybe a tourist postcard. The art pieces may live on in museums. The parties are a closed chapter, and the stores that fed communities have a different logo now or none at all. There are lessons that matter beyond nostalgia. Governance matters. So do incentives. If you want a company to survive market upheaval, align leadership compensation with long-term performance, preserve capital for reinvestment, and put in place systems that prevent a single person's taste from overriding operational necessities. History is not moralizing, it's instructive. The Hartford A&P story is a cautionary tale about the fragility of institutions when stewardship is informal and tastes are expensive. As the emotional intensity rises toward the end, consider the human stakes. Families who counted on these stores for work, communities that lost familiar places, employees who watched their employer become someone else. The fall of a dynasty isn't just financial paperwork. It's a reconfiguration of livelihoods and civic memory. The $2.7 billion number is staggering as a headline, but behind it are smaller accounts. The lunch counter conversations that will never occur in the same way. The weekly routines that were disrupted. So what should we take with us? First, wealth and legacy are not self-sustaining. They require intentional stewardship that balances personal ambition and institutional health. Second, systems change fast. Dominance today doesn't guarantee relevance tomorrow. Third, the human element, the investor with an island plan, the clerk who remembers brighter days, gives the ledger its moral weight. One more small request before we close. If this kind of careful storytelling appeals to you, consider subscribing. It helps us bring more stories like this to you, quietly and without fuss. When you walk past an empty store window, remember this. Empires can fall in slow motion. The headlines mark the end, but the real story is how choices add up, in boardrooms and on beaches, in banks and in back rooms. Huntington Hartford's grand projects were a personal dream, bright, loud, and expensive. A&P's decline was an institutional consequence, gradual, complex, and ultimately terminal. In the end, a dynasty that once taught a nation how to shop left behind a ledger that reads like a novel of missed opportunities and misaligned priorities. The beaches he built still glitter. The grocery signs are gone. The lesson, if there is one, is neither simple nor punitive. It is a reminder that stewardship is the quiet work that sustains public goods. Without it, even great companies dissolve in the arithmetic of time.